All right, what we're going to do in this video is we're going to look at the air superiority phase. Quick correction from my last video. I mistakenly said that the medium-range aircraft from Southwest Theater could fly missions because of its medium range in the adjacent air theater, and that's incorrect. That would be correct for the next war system by GMT, but not correct for this particular rule system. So how it can work is these guys could fly their missions in this theater and then transfer when they land in the other theater. So that's what medium-range aircraft can do. Long-range aircraft could fly from one theater to the other. The short-range aircraft, they can fly a mission in here, or they can choose to remain available and at the end of the turn transfer to the flown box of another theater. So that's basically a correction from last time. I also forgot to roll for the crater repair at the end of the video last time. So that's actually supposed to be done as part of the aircraft maintenance phase, and I didn't do that. So I went ahead and took the liberty of rolling the dice afterwards. I rolled a 1 for NATO on this side, which is really unfortunate for them. So 6 aircraft at least are going to be pulled out of the avail box into grounded in the next turn, and that's no good. So they got quite a few aircraft in their flown box already due to rolling 6s on their aircraft maintenance. So they're probably going to get a bunch of aircraft back next turn. They also have some reinforcements, 3 reinforcements coming in next turn. But to lose 6 of them again, have that high of a number, is going to have an effect on the ground. We also rolled for weather already. That's the weather conditions have reversed themselves. So we have overcast conditions up in Western Europe. We have clear skies in the south, which doesn't really help the NATO side or the Warsaw Pact either, because there's not a whole lot of activity up here. Most of the boys on the NATO side are grounded or shot down. And you know what? I think I forgot to consolidate those. So let's go ahead and take care of that real quick. It's easy to get distracted by the main theater and forget about these subsidiary theaters. So I'm going to go ahead and throw these 2 guys in the cup, and we're going to find out which one. Shaking the cup, not looking, pulling blindly out, and the one that we're oh geez. It's just kind of been that way. So poor Spanish F-18s never even got a chance to fly. Destroyed on the ground. So we'll go ahead and put them down here, and they will be the first marker on the morale, I guess you'd call it the morale charts. All right, so that's taken care of. And losses are consolidated. We're not going to really run. I'm not going to run any air superiority missions here. I'm just going to leave this alone because there's nobody that can contest them. There's no need to exhaust aircraft for no good reason. So that is all taken care of. Looking at our sequence of play, we can see we finished aircraft maintenance. We've rolled for weather. We're not doing the nukes. So now we do air superiority phase, and I've taken the liberty of already starting that off camera. Because of the overcast conditions, aircraft values are halved, rounded down. So a 3 becomes a 1 becomes a 0. So I put the MiG-21s from the checks into the air superiority box because their rating does become at least a 1. But none of the other available aircraft could be placed in air superiority because you have to have a rating of at least 1. So all the other guys have black circled values, so their values are unchanged by the overcast conditions. So we have a total of 6 units. NATO looks at that and decides what they're going to put in the box so that you always get to see what the Warsaw Pact put first. And we went ahead and threw in all of our black dot air superiority boys. So 2 F-15s from the United States, 2 Mirage 2000 from France, and a couple F-4s from the West German Republic, because the value of 2 is not great, but it is at least in a black box. And we wanted to have some intercept capability. So all of the units that are in those boxes there, they don't go head-to-head and fight each other like you would in the next war system. Instead, they just remain in there until you try to run a mission. And whenever you run a mission, like a deep strike mission or a strike on a specific ground target, then what you do is you can take one of the units out of here and run it as an escort. The opponent can use one of their units to run it as an interceptor. If for some reason one side has more units than the other in their box, they have air superiority. And the advantage to that is you can take 2 units out of this box to either escort or run an intercept. So you could really protect a high value target or something like that. If you really want to make sure your stealth bomber wasn't detected, you could use it in that particular fashion. Or more likely for the Soviets, if you had air superiority, you'd really want to guard that particular bomber, because the Tu-160s can put a lot of hurt down on ground targets. So that's basically all you do for the air superiority. So we've gone ahead and placed the units in the box. The next thing we do is deep strike phase. And in the deep strike phase, the Warsaw Pact is going to assign units to logistical strikes, runway cratering, and escorts for those missions. Let me discuss the differences between them after we analyze the overall ground situation. After the NATO side of the turn, in turn 1, there was some heavy counterattacks in the south. A West German division and several brigade-size units from, I think, France were destroyed in a counterattack that knocked out a Warsaw Pact tank division, a Soviet tank division, and a Czech, I think, tank division south of Regensburg. You really don't want to trade losses like that. It was an exchange result, and you really don't want to do that. So there's an opening to continue this offensive here in the south. The line that the NATO has drawn is more or less along you might call it the main line. It's along the Main River and just outside of Nuremberg. And there's some reserves in place to kind of disrupt any kind of breakthroughs from the Warsaw Pact. So Warsaw Pact could make some ground down here, but I don't see a clear punch-through opportunity necessarily in turn 2. The United States 5th Corps and 7th Corps units counterattacked heavy, destroyed a Soviet division, well, more or less knocked it hors de combat out of their advanced position here. It's now located there with a lot of disruption. And we've actually crossed into East Germany and made a spoiling attack on the East German mechanized division just across the border. Tried to stabilize the front along this line here and create some depth along the coast now that the air mobile units are starting to move into position. So that's basically the overall line. Hamburg is surrounded and isolated. The paratroopers that were in, Bielefeld, were driven out of there with some losses. They took quite a bit of disruption to get them out of there. But they were not destroyed. They're still intact. We can use them for some missions later on, but I think they're hunkering down in this Hanover stack. What I look to do with the Warsaw Pact is liquidate the Hamburg position, liquidate the Kiel position, take those 2 cities, and start moving on Denmark with the excessive units that have been accumulating on the northern side of the front lines. So that's the overall situation on the ground. There are opportunities to strike key units with Warsaw Pact air power, but because of the overcast conditions, the strike values on these 3 aircraft are knocked down to 1, as well as their close support ratings of the Su-25s and the Su-17. This unit here is only good for a cheap little strike mission. So maybe I'll use this guy to strike a ground unit, and we're going to do that during the Pact segment. So we're going to do logistic strikes and runway cratering now. The Pact segment will be later, and that's when we'll do the strike and interdiction missions. So what we're going to do now is look at what kind of logistical strikes do we want to make. Do we want to make any of those? A logistical strike is going to use the strike rating. All the deep strikes are going to use the strike rating, which is the bottom rightmost value on the aircraft units. And what you're going to do is you're going to roll the dice, and I believe a 4 or higher imposes a hit on your target. If you're doing a runway cratering, a 6 results in a destroyed aircraft in addition to a hit on and driving the cratering marker up the track. So a hit will drive cratering up the track. If you're doing a logistical strike, for each hit you can take a specific NATO unit and mark it as being out of supply. NATO can then take those and say, you know what? I'm going to give them emergency supply and pull that off of that unit, and instead I'm going to put 2 out of supply markers on different NATO units, and those markers are going to impact their ability to move and to fight. Slows them down. So it's kind of a cool little system how that works. I think for our purposes here, I want to go ahead and use my Su-24s for these strikes. So I'm going to take 2 of them, and I'm going to do 2 of them with runway cratering missions because I want to keep that up. I want to keep up the pressure. I think we've got an edge on NATO air power. So I'm going to run 2 strike missions against the aircraft bases, and then I'm going to use 2 more Su-24s, and we're going to target supply. Now the question now becomes, do I want to escort all of these aircraft? And the answer, I think, has to be yes, I do want to intercept with them. Or escort them, I should say. I need to escort these guys, so let's use, for the aircraft cratering missions, we'll escort them with MiG-23s, and we'll escort this one here with a MiG-23, and we'll use the MiG-21 to escort the Su-24. Now, NATO has a decision to make. NATO has to decide, do I want to intercept these strikes? So he gets to see what you put down, if they're escorted or not, and then he can choose to intercept. What's he going to intercept with? Got a number of options here. Thinking I'll probably just go ahead and use that F4s to intercept that guy there. Maybe an F4 on this guy. And we need to, you know what, we need to at least protect these bases. All right, let's use an F-15 and a Mirage 2000 to try to protect our bases better. We'll let one of the logistic strikes go through, and we'll try to intercept the MiG-21s. That way, we're fighting with an advantage on all 3 counts. And then once you've done that, then the NATO decides to allocate its own strikes. So we'll send the F-117 out on its lonesome. Hopefully it isn't detected, and we'll try to do runway cratering. So we'll keep all the runway cratering stuff up here. Do we want to do any logistic strikes? Well, we do have a tornado here that could do a strike. Let's send them against air bases as well. And let's go ahead and we know he's got MiG-21. Let's go ahead and escort that one. I don't want to lose that aircraft. So we're going to go after their air bases and with 2 aircraft here. And we're escorting this one. This one's unescorted. But you have to roll to detect that unit. So those are our allocations. Next thing we're going to do is roll out those combats. Well, we're going to go ahead and resolve the logistical strikes here first. What we're going to look at is, because we have an intercept situation, there's going to be 2 rounds potentially to aerial combat. We'll look at the air superiority rating of this unit versus this unit. The higher one fires first. If they have the same rating, they fire at the same time. But remember, overcast conditions mean this guy's got a rating of 1. So the F4s are going to fire first, and they threw a 2. We're going to look at our columns here. Air superiority rating of 2 on the Phantom means he had to have rolled at least a 4 for that to have had any effect. Really what they wanted is a 5 or better. That would have aborted the MiG-21 before it could shoot, and without an escort around, there would be a second round of combat. In this case, there won't be, and there's no way for the Czech MiG-21 to hurt the F4 retroactively, I don't think. No, worst he could do would be abort it, so he's going to go ahead and put both these guys into their flown boxes. Next, we look at the strike rating of the Su-24. It's a rating of 3, unchanged due to weather because of the black circle. We're going to throw 3 dice, 1 for each of the values, and we're going to total up the results, divide by 2, and that becomes a 7, divided by 2 becomes a 3. I believe we round those down, but I will double check. I'll have to pull out the book and double check that, but I'm pretty sure we do round that down. And so 3 out of supply markers will be placed due to that particular strike. Next, we're going to go ahead and throw for the second strike, which was not opposed. So the MiG-23 goes into the flown box. Oh, you know what? I forgot to roll for ground fire. Let me back up. Ground fire. Air defense fire, we are on a logistical strike. So a rating of, if a die roll of 6 is made, the strike aborts. So we're going to go ahead and throw a die for that. And this green die just hasn't been doing it. Maybe I'll have to switch to the blue one for the for NATO. So that 1 means no effect on that table. So we're going to roll for ground fire. Geez. They rolled a 1 for ground fire for this Su-24. NATO just can't get a break right now. But the shots are pretty underwhelming, so 2 more markers. And I'm kind of clipping these as I go, so I'll have to clip these guys. And that basically is going to impede the quality of a total of 5 NATO units. And if they want to emergency supply for each one of these that they want to reposition, it's going to cost them an additional unsupplied marker. So if they decide to reposition all 5 of these, there would be 10 markers put on alternate NATO units. All right, now we're going to look at the runway cratering missions, but let me clarify something. I just double checked because I want to make sure I rounded that correctly. It's actually stacking points, not units. So we're going to have 5 stacking points worth of NATO units that are going to be affected by these supply conditions. So I need to think about what units do I want to mark out as supply, because their movement rating is going to be reduced down to 3 movement points instead of the normal 6. Remember, every unit has 6 movement points, but different classes of movement pay different costs per terrain. So maybe this would be a good target to put one of them on. He's a crack U.S. Armored Division that's got no disruption whatsoever. 3 stacking points worth of him. That might be good for him. His attack rating would then also be halved and rounded down. So that's kind of a juicy target there. I need to think, where do they want to make counterattacks, and maybe mark those guys out of supply, or units that are about to move into a key blocking position. So this is one of those systems where you kind of have to go through it a few turns and see what things do to learn how to play it skillfully. So we'll go ahead and mark those down in just a moment, but let's finish these intercepts. We have a Mirage 2000 against a MiG-23, and we're going to fire with the Mirages first because their rating is 4, and that's not going to cut it. 2 on the 4 column becomes a half result. So the MiG-21's got a rating of 3, but because of this, they're going to fire on the 1 column. But basically, they did their job. They screened the Su-27s effectively, and they rolled a 2 as well. So nothing much happens there. These guys are both can be flown, and then we are going to go ahead and fire 3 dice. We're looking for 4, 5s, and 6s. Ouch. 4, 5s, and 6s. See, this is what would have been nicer to roll on the logistic table, the logistic strikes. But that's a good shot there. So that's 2 hits. So runway cratering goes up 1, 2, and destroyed on runway 1 because we did have a 6 result. Oh, hang on, hold that. Always get ahead of myself. Runway cratering. All right, a 5 or a 6 on ground fire. A 6 in particular would be nice. That would shoot them down. But like I said, haven't had a whole lot of luck with these NATO dice, so that one does go through. Next, the MiG-23s against the F-15s. F-15s are on the 5 column, and we'll roll another 3. I think that actually will do something, though. 3 will shoot him down. Eagles are going to get shot down in half, so he is going to, I believe he gets to fire, but then at the end of it, he is shot down. So he will get to go ahead and do his shot here, and if he rolls a 5 or a 6, that would actually help him in the screening of the Su-24. He rolled a 2, so the Su-24 is going to get shot at. If he had rolled high enough, if he'd rolled a 5, the F-15's rating would have been halved and brought down to a 2, which might have been effective at blocking him from taking damage. The SU-24 can abort. He's going to take a shot now. And there's going to be a +1 die roll modifier to the F-15 Eagle. And he rolled finally well. So a 6 is going to shoot this guy down for sure. And so we have 2 aircraft units knocked down by those Eagles. That's what NATO needed in the worst possible way. Whoops, put them in the wrong box. So they go into the shot down box. There you go. And then the Eagle has landed, as we say. So he flies. One last intercept. Oh, you know what? We forgot. I forgot to put a, just going to put a unit in on this. Try to stop these guys. I like to, after the NATO allocates its strikes, the Warsaw Pact can intercept, and so we will go ahead. I forgot to mark him down. I'm going to put the Su-27, try to take out those Mirage 2000s. So the Mirages are going to fire second, and whoops, both sides rolled a 1, and so nothing much happens. That's kind of a wasted strike for that Su-27. They rolled a 1, and NATO rolled a 1, so nothing happened there. The Mirages were halved on their hit, and the that having a halved result of 2 meant they would have to roll a 6 in order to cause any hits on those Su-27. So the Tornadoes are going to break through. We're going to roll for ground defense, and they roll a 2, so nothing happens there. So 2 dice coming at the pack. Oh, for Pete's sake. Finally get a strike through, and that's what you roll for damage. So no cratering at all. A whole lot to do for nothing there. Man, a lot of shooting and not many hits there on that particular exercise. One last one is we got to roll to see if the... Oh, it's detected. Kind of wish I had intercepted it, but I only had one more flight left. He's only got a rating of 2, so I decided to just chance it. Well, he's detected, so he's going to take ground fire. And the roll is a 3, need a 5 or 6 to affect it. So he doesn't affect it. 2 dice. Are you kidding me? All right, you're watching that roll. That's just... wow. Well, so much for the skunk works. They're stinking up the show there. All right, so they're done, and the Su-24s are done. And that, my friends, is basically how aerial combat and strikes and stuff work. It's pretty quick when you're working through it. You just got to make sure you don't do it too quick like me and forget steps. That's an important thing. All right, so all the units are marked out of there. The next thing I would have to do is go ahead and put down my NATO unsupplied. I got to decide what I'm going to do with that. And then we can move on to the next segment of the turn. And I'm looking at my, let's see, okay, supply phase is basically where we're going to mark all of that stuff. Emergency supply priorities are handled. No critical losses are going to happen right now, so we're not going to worry about that. And then the next step would be whether or not we're not going to do Black Sea or Norwegian Sea control. Just basically strike interdictions. We can run strikes to interdict movement or to actually strike particular units. So these can be flown by the short-range aircraft. So MiG-27s can run these missions and so forth. But there's precious few interceptors left in the air superiority box. So kind of a guessing game here for both sides. You know, where do you want to spend your Eagles? Ideally, you'd want to use the Eagles to protect something and maybe try to bait the MiG-29s into an unfair fight. And so there's kind of going to be a cat and mouse game in allocating those. I rather envision, because of the low strike ratings on these guys, that there's not going to be any flying of NATO strikes from this point in the NATO segment later on in the turn. But during the pack segments, we might fly some MiG-27s because they have a strike rating of 2, but the ground support rating is going to be affected by the weather, bringing it down to a 1. So it makes more sense to use them in a strike capacity rather than holding off and using them for ground in a ground attack role. So that's what's going to be coming up next. Hope you enjoyed this video and the series. This is a really cool game system, and hopefully I'm doing a reasonably decent job at showing you how it plays.